I here open the floor for questions. Since I don't see the people, so I see one hand there. There are the microphones in the middle of the room. So everybody who would like to ask a question, please stand there. Ask the question. What I suggest is the members of the panel will take all the questions, and then we'll give each one of you the opportunity to respond. Everyone, please say the name, and if you would like to address somebody specifically, do so. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I also wrote in my phone, so just talking about new technology. My name is Ravik Greenberg. I work in donor affairs at Ben Gurion University. My question is about transparency. How do you suggest in financial statements, and how do your organizations communicate your operating costs and your overhead? And how do you feel it's best to communicate that transparency from the outset with the donor? Thank you.
Thank you, Ravit. Lucky that your battery didn't went off in the middle of the question. That's using technology.
Keep going.
If you have that's your question, right?
Yeah, did you say to wait till all?
No. Everybody will ask the questions, and then the panelists will answer together.
Thank you. I'm Inon Schenker. I'm a PhD in public health from Duke University and managing a project of Israelis helping save people from AIDS in Africa. One suggestion and one question. The suggestion is that maybe we need to have a better clearinghouse for donors interested in supporting projects in the Jewish world, and I would like to propose all of us to perhaps collectively address the host of this meeting, President Shimon Peres, to perhaps host and establish an honest, efficient and effective clearinghouse for projects for Israel and the Jewish world to be perhaps efficient in what we've heard are quite of the challenges. My question is actually to our Australian colleague, to Mr. Mark Libler. With the amount that you're raising for Israel in 1 year, you could end the AIDS epidemic in Papua New Guinea, but through an Israeli intervention, for example, connecting, and I see that you're the one with the kippah around, circumcision to the prevention of AIDS, which is something that comes out of Israel and has been scientifically advised to be able to save a lot of lives. So a dilemma. You can take Israelis, bring them to Papua New Guinea to train local medical people how to circumcise. HIV and circumcision go exactly in the opposite. If you're circumcised, you won't get HIV. Or you can send money to Israel to support Hadassah, Tel HaShomer, Asaf HaRofeh. So Australian, what would you do? Thank you.
Thank you. I think last time we met, we were dealing with space medicine, no? Something like, so we came from space to Papua New Guinea. Welcome. Any other questions? Yeah. Only if you speak. You can use the other mic, I believe.
No, it works. Okay. You hear me now? Okay. My name is David Roth. I'm the director of the Urano Foundation. I don't know how many other funders there are here, but it's interesting to hear the dialogue among the fundraisers. Our foundation is in the midst of sort of going through a lot of what has been discussed here and going through what I call now the third stage in the development of philanthropy. The first stage being giving money to the collective institutions through the Federation in the United States. The second stage being a foundation going about things in a very individual way, as was discussed, funding specific projects, and as private donors who are looking to get involved in a variety of friends organizations and the like. And the third stage that we're looking at now, I think is the golden mean, is creating funder collaboratives, whereby funders who share...
Try to keep it to a question.
I will, I'm going to ask the question. Whereby funders come together around a shared vision, and it's not each funder going out alone, but working together as funders to create the vision and sometimes to create organizations or networks in order to achieve what they want to do. I would like to know the extent to which, in the variety of countries mentioned here, this is a trend that is being seen. Thank you.
Thank you. See more questions, so please try to keep it as a question and less of a declaration. Okay, so you know what, we'll stop here. The panelists will answer, see if we have time, and we continue. I would like to add, with your permission, taking the privilege of standing here, another small question. All of you refer to the major or to significant donors. What about the added value of fundraising small donations? And when I said added values, I refer, for example, to keeping people more identified and close to Israel, exposed to information, etc. Do you find it relevant in the new times? Please take your time to answer all these questions and maybe to refer to each other's words. We'll give 5 minutes each and then we see how we move on. I suggest you can take it from your places if it's more comfortable for you. And Ruben, maybe we will start with you and we'll just go on the line.
I can't say much about the circumcision of Papua-Guineas, so I skip that question. But about the question about the woman from Ben Gurion University, Ravid, I think that you first must start with being able to be transparent fully. I think there's no reason to hide anything anymore in this time. Even if you're making a lot of cost, there will be a good reason to make that cost, and if there's no good reason, you don't have a reason to exist. So I think there's a start, because nothing you can hide anymore, and that's due to new technology. You know, it's also with buying a car. You know, you first go on the internet to search all the different cars, and then you go for test drive. And that's the same as with philanthropy nowadays. You know, you're going to check out what's there. And what's interesting, you're going to see. And interesting needs to be appealing to you, it must fulfill your needs, but it must be transparent. So I think the ability to do that is one. And the second thing is to use the tools that are available nowadays to do that. You also ask how you do that in your local campaigns. We send out our annual report specific on cost base to all our donors. And we also try to accommodate our major donors in per project base. But I feel that we are far off from an ideal situation, because the ideal situation is to show every donor what's happening with his money. And if 10, 20 or 30% is going to overhead or whatsoever, you can buy him in. I think that we must not be afraid to buy people in to spend money on overhead, because everybody is in business and they also know that also there, you know, there's stuff. So that's basically my part of the contribution. I also lost the last question. I'm sorry.
I will stand here. Please, Professor Lawrence.
I'll just add one word on transparency. I think paradoxically, the more transparency, the less inclination of the donor to want to micromanage the institution. And so, in fact, an added benefit of transparency, in my experience, is that you actually are setting, to a certain extent, the mind of the donor at ease, and there are fewer questions. Whereas I think one used to think you hold back information for fear that it will invite people into a excessive examination of the internal workings of the institution. I think it's actually precisely the opposite. The more information available, the less inclination there is to do that, because you're building trust. The suggestion of the clearinghouse of projects involving Israel, I think, is a very intriguing one. I think what would make a lot of us concerned, and I don't hear this to be part of the suggestion, is also centralizing the decision-making as to how grants would be made. But centralizing a place where information could come together, a kind of Craigslist of philanthropy with Israel is an eBay is. I think somebody must have a phone on. No, I think would be a very helpful way of a lot of us who are involved in parallel projects finding that information funneled into the same place. And I think that for agencies, foundations, and the like, it could be a very useful place to come. So I for one, would be very interested in thinking more about that, and it might be a very interesting takeaway from this conference.
Thank you. Mark?
I don't want to say anything more about transparency. I agree with what Fred has said. As far as the clearinghouse is concerned, look, the internet itself is not a bad clearinghouse. One of the problems with a clearinghouse is to find some objective basis of actually describing the value of the organisations that you're dealing with, as distinct from just naming them. So if you're just naming them, then you can have a clearinghouse, but the moment you move from that in terms of any sort of assessment, you're running into dangerous grounds, conflict of interest, jealousies and everything under the sun. So it's not easy. I really liked the question about the AIDS epidemic. Yeah, and it raises because, I mean, for example, talked about the Australian campaign. We raise money fundamentally for Aliyah, for Klita, for rescue, and to the extent that, you know, that doesn't satisfy our fundraising, I think our donors are interested in nation building. They want to contribute nation building in the State of Israel. That's where we come from. And I'm not sure that you know, an AIDS epidemic in Africa necessarily comes within that, but there would be no reason why, for example, we wouldn't be supporting an organisation in Israel that in fact does that. So the answer is, yeah, I don't think there's any conflict. But that does raise another issue, which is worthwhile spending just a few seconds on, when you start talking about different sort of objectives. The whole issue of the federated campaigns, one of the things we didn't have time really to dwell on, the thing that is creating all sorts of problems for fundraising for Israel through the federation system is it all goes into a central pot, and then you have a number of senior officers and federation execs who ultimately decide where the money goes. Where I come from, that doesn't happen. Our Keren HaYesod campaign raises money only for Israel. So no group of officials will decide, oh, look, Israel's important, but, you know, we've got real problems in our community, we've got to keep more and more of the money back. Can't happen. The donors decide where the money goes. That's worthwhile mentioning. And finally, Moody raised a very interesting subject, and that's small donations. We're not just, Keren HaYesod, we're not just a fundraising organisation. We have thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of donors within the community. And for many of them, that is part of their connection and identification as Jews, identification with the State of Israel. So even though we raise, probably, 80% of our money from, 10% of our donors, running these mass campaigns in terms of the community support for and identification with the State of Israel for us is absolutely critical.
Toda, Mark. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you. I will answer the last question Moody posed. We work in Mexico, and particularly the women work as follows. We have 24 different groups, and the 24 different groups work for Keren HaYesod and for many, many organizations. But in February, we stopped the work of every single organization, and everybody works for Keren HaYesod only. And we work on Aliyah, Klita, we work on education, and the small donors are vital for the work of our groups, the 24 groups, because we also work amongst those groups for Mexico. So the link and the identification with Israel is of utmost importance, and it is one of our 4 main objectives. Small donors are vital. We respect them if they give $100,000 or $100. The minimum that we ask women to give is $100. That's the minimum. And from that on, we respect everybody, and it's a link to Israel. Transparency. I'll tell you, we have enough problems in our campaigns, in our Macbeth, not to comply with transparency. So, we work as follows. We work all the year, and in November, we give our information, and people are allowed to go to the office and check the information they want. We never give information by mail or by phone or just like that. Our office is open according to the decision of the president in turn. So transparency is vital. Our objectives and our needs are based on that and on hard work. Thank you.
תודה, מרתה. Ellen, please.
And Mexico remains still one of the most successful and best organized communities in the world. The Jewish Agency has, in the last 5 years, I think, affected a pretty serious revolution in the terms of the way our financials are produced. It's all up on the internet. We produce audited financial statements that are available to everybody, and we also produce, unlike I think most international large NGOs, we produce every 3 months a updated set of financial reports of budget to actual. And we are looking very carefully at this issue of the operating costs and the issue of overheads. We think this is something that donors have to be aware of. And somebody else, I think Mark referred to this, we're working very hard on developing a system at the moment, which will probably take another few months before it's implemented, and to be able to show a donor, which may be a community, it may be an individual donor, actually what is happening in the critical path of their money in the way the program is actually being implemented. And our goal is to actually be able to have that accessible to a donor so that a donor will be able to actually watch what is happening with their money. A clearinghouse is a complicated idea. I think if it's not annotated and it doesn't have a set of standards, what you land up with is a huge laundry list, and I think it's something to be concerned about. I do want to say something about the question with regard to New Guinea. I think there's a very important impulse amongst young Jews and young Jewish donors to ask the question of what about the world and what about the third world? And in the last year, the Jewish Agency has been very active in developing a response that makes it possible for young Jews in groups of 50% Israelis, 25 to 40, 50% Israelis, 50% Jews from the rest of the world, to go and to work in the third world as a way of building their Jewish identity. And the first of these will open next week in Gondar in Ethiopia, and the next will open in August in India, and a third by the end of the year in Ecuador. And I think that part of that question that relates to what is the responsibility for Jews to what is happening in the broader society, and particularly in the third world, is an issue that's very important to young Jews. Service is very important to young Jews, and it's very important to young Jewish philanthropists, and it's something that we have to deal with. I definitely think that funded collaborations is something that has to be promoted. How you build a shared vision and bring people together around one idea is actually, I think, at the heart of the collective. And I think that your question about how you build funded collaborations around some core ideas, very, very important. And I do want to reflect on what Mark said about the mass campaign. At the heart of the great federations, even today in North America, that have managed to retain the power of the collective and have managed to retain that sacred survival, that civil religion, is the fact that they have not given up on the small donors, because it may not be economical, but it certainly remains a way of continuing to keep the community connected.